From the frozen rivers of Russes to the plains of Poland, cities that had stood for centuries were erased in days. Kiev burned. Kovno fell. Even the Holy Roman Emperor whispered that the end of Christendom might be at hand, and at the trembling heart of Europe stood Hungary, a crossroads of east and west, a land of rivers and grass, proud and unprepared. In the year 1241, King Béla IV ruled a realm born from nomads, but softened by peace. His nobles still rode with banners of chivalry. Their armies fought with the pride of feudal lords, not the precision of a machine. But what was approaching them was no ordinary army. It was an algorithm of war designed by Subutai, the greatest general of the Mongol Empire. Villages to the east vanished without sound. Monasteries found only ashes where towns had stood. Refugees poured into the Danube basin, whispering tales of horsemen who could shoot backward while galloping, who appeared and vanished like ghosts. For the first time since the age of Attila, Europe remembered fear, and Hungary in that fear began to awaken. Before we uncover that secret, make sure to like this video and help us reach 10,000 likes within the first 24 hours. It really helps the channel grow. You're watching Heroic History English, where we bring the past back to life with epic battles, forgotten empires, and the strategies that shaped our world. Now let's begin. The storm came in the spring. Across the Carpathians rode an army unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Horsemen who spoke no known tongue, whose banners were of black horsehair, and whose discipline was mathematical in its cruelty. Subutai, the old wolf of the steppe, led them with an intellect that seemed almost divine. Behind him stretched the machinery of annihilation. Scouts that moved faster than rumor, engineers who built bridges from rivers and siege towers from forests, and a command system that could orchestrate death like music. Hungary was their next verse. King Béla IV, heir to a proud and fractured realm, had refused to submit. He dismissed envoys who warned him of the coming horde. Subutai watched the fires flicker across the plain and smiled. He had studied this pattern before in China, in Rus, in Khwarezm. At dawn, the river exploded. Mongol engineers had built floating bridges upstream. Their horsemen crossed like a shadow, hitting from multiple directions at once. Arrows fell in perfect cadence. The Hungarian knights charged heavy and bright, smashing through one Mongol wing, only to find themselves encircled, their momentum devoured by precision. When the bridge behind them collapsed under fire, the Sajo became a trap. Men drowned in armor. Banners vanished in smoke. Béla barely escaped with his life. The flower of Hungarian nobility was gone by noon. The plain of Mohi was silent by evening, covered in the glint of broken mail and the stench of burnt flesh. Europe trembled. From Pest to Vienna, bells rang in mourning. The papal courts whispered of the apocalypse. Chronicles wrote that the wrath of God had returned upon mankind. But for Hungary, it was not divine wrath. It was human failure, measured and absolute. Béla IV fled westward, first to Pressburg and then to Dalmatia, pursued by Mongol detachments. His letters to the Pope and to Western princes were desperate, calling for aid that never came. In his exile, he began to understand the anatomy of defeat. He realized that the Mongols had not conquered by sheer strength. Their victory at Mohi was not a miracle of violence, but a triumph of structure. They had maps of rivers and roads. They had communication through signal fires and flags. They had scouts who moved like whispers ahead of the main host. They knew the land better than the men who lived on it. Hungary, by contrast, was a medieval mosaic. Nobles who fought for personal glory, castles that served as private fiefs, peasants who fled at the first smoke. There was no unity of defense, no network, no memory shared between provinces. So Béla learned. During that year of flight, he walked through ruins that had once been villages. He saw that stone fortresses had resisted longer than timber ones, that marshes and mountains had slowed the Mongols more than armies did. He spoke to survivors who hid in monasteries, and to Cumans who told him how the nomads thought, ate and scouted. Piece by piece, he began to assemble a counter-strategy. That was an awakening. By 1242, as suddenly as they had come, the Mongols vanished. Ogedei Khan had died far away in Mongolia, and Subutai was recalled east to manage succession. Europe called it a miracle. Béla called it a reprieve. He knew they would return one day, and next time divine mercy would not intervene. When he rode back into his scarred capital, the king no longer saw a kingdom of knights and barons. He saw terrain, networks, lines of supply, choke points, and vulnerabilities. The Battle of Mohi had broken the old Hungary, but in its ashes lay the blueprint of a new one. He decreed that no fortress would ever again be made of wood. Stone was to become the kingdom's second skin. Nobles who built castles were rewarded, not taxed. Settlers from Germany and Poland were invited to rebuild towns in fortified patterns. Marshlands were drained or redirected to form natural moats. Roads were laid not just for trade, but for rapid mobilization between defense points. And beneath all this, Béla cultivated silence. His strategy would be no proclamation, no boast. It would live in the habits of his people, in the architecture of villages, in the memory of craftsmen and builders. To the outside world, Hungary seemed to have recovered slowly, almost timidly. To Béla's court, the rebuilding looked like desperation, but in reality the kingdom was transforming itself into a living fortress, a web of resilience disguised as ruin. What Europe saw as weakness, Béla designed as camouflage. What seemed like surrender was in truth adaptation. The secret was not in a single weapon, but in an entire way of thinking. The idea that survival itself could be a strategy. Years later, travelers who crossed the Hungarian plains noticed something different. Villages no longer stood exposed. They huddled around stone keeps. Bridges had watchtowers. Forest paths were mapped not by lords, but by royal cartographers. For the first time, Hungary was thinking like the Mongols, system over valor, intelligence over impulse. And so the king who once ran from the steppe now prepared to outlast it. The man history called Béla the Fugitive would become Béla the Builder. When the Mongols vanished as swiftly as they had come, Hungary stood in ruins. Fields lay blackened, cities emptied, and the air still smelled of burnt wood and iron. Entire counties had been depopulated. Some regions lost 2/3 of their people. The rivers that once glittered with trade now carried silence. But amid this devastation, King Béla IV did something no other ruler of Europe dared. He did not rebuild the past. He redesigned the future. Where others saw ruins, he saw blueprints. Where nobles saw despair, he saw opportunity. And in that desolation, he began to weave what historians would later call the invisible fortress. Béla understood that the next Mongol invasion would not be won by armies in the field. He had seen Mohi, seen how even the bravest knights became prey to mobility and precision. So he chose a different kind of power, endurance. Hungary, he realized, could not match the Mongols in speed, but it could force them to stop. It could make the battlefield fight against them. He ordered fortresses of stone and mortar to rise where wooden walls once stood. The new castles were not merely strongholds. They were nodes in a network designed to buy time, to exhaust, to resist. Each stronghold was placed near water, on hills or within forests that could serve as both shield and trap. Nobles were granted the right to fortify their lands, a revolutionary move in feudal Europe. Instead of hoarding power, Béla dispersed it. Castles no longer stood only for prestige. They were part of a defensive algorithm. Within 2 decades, more than 100 new stone fortresses rose across Hungary. Towns were rebuilt with concentric layouts, their cores fortified, their streets narrowing like funnels toward central keeps. Even monasteries became miniature bastions, sanctuaries of both faith and resistance. For the first time in Central Europe, Hungary established a network of royal messengers and scouts trained not for war, but for observation. Roads were repaired and standardized, not to carry merchants, but to carry information. Watchtowers were placed along trade routes, not only for tolls, but as early warning posts. If the Mongols had beaten Europe through intelligence, Béla would now use intelligence as his defense. He commissioned mapmakers and scribes to chart rivers, marshes, mountain passes, every inch of Hungarian terrain that the Mongols had once exploited. This was the birth of something Europe had not yet understood: geostrategic cartography. Each village learned where to flee, each garrison where to hold, each lord how to communicate without waiting for royal command. It was not heroism, it was systemic resilience. In time, Hungary became a landscape of hidden coordination, a country that could absorb shock without collapsing. The Mongols, who relied on the rapid disintegration of enemy networks, would find no single point of failure here. But Béla's transformation went deeper still. He knew that fortresses without people were monuments to fear, not strength. So he invited settlers from Germany, Poland, Moravia, and Italy, offering them land, autonomy, and protection. These hospites rebuilt towns, revived trade, and diversified defense. Every foreigner who came brought not just labor, but knowledge of mining, metallurgy, and architecture. The kingdom began to hum again, not with the chaos of feudal rivalry, but with the rhythm of recovery. Béla also reformed the Cuman tribes, once nomadic allies and later enemies, integrating them into the royal army. Their cavalry became part of Hungary's frontier guard, trained to use steppe tactics against the steppe. Thus, the kingdom turned its old weakness, division, into adaptability. Its new strength was not uniformity, but plural intelligence. A century later, chroniclers would say that Béla had rebuilt Hungary from bones and memory. But what he truly rebuilt was perception, the very way his people understood war. Hungary's geography had once doomed it, flat, open, perfect for cavalry. But Béla's strategy turned that curse into a weapon. By fortifying the Carpathian passes and securing the Danube crossings, he created layers of delay. Any invading army would find itself stretched, bleeding time and supply. Behind these barriers, the Hungarian heartland would retreat, drawing the enemy deeper, forcing them to confront emptiness. Scorched fields, false paths, villages already evacuated. It was an early form of elastic defense, centuries before the term existed. Even the landscape was altered. Floodgates and levees were built along rivers, ready to be opened to drown entire plains if necessary. The kingdom itself could turn into a trap, vast, silent, waiting. Years turned into decades. The generation that had seen Mohi grew old, but never forgot. Children were raised on stories not of heroic victory, but of endurance, the kind that survives fire to fight again. When Mongol envoys returned in 1285, testing Hungary's borders once more, they found not the scattered realm of 1241, but a fortress nation. They crossed into Transylvania, expecting easy plunder. Instead, every pass they entered was watched. Every advance was met not by knights but by silence. Villages evacuated before they arrived. Bridges collapsed behind them. Scouts disappeared into forests where Cuman horsemen hunted in shadow. And when they finally reached the plains, they met castles that did not burn. Stone absorbed their fire. The Hungarians no longer charged blindly. They waited, fortified, coordinated. The Mongols, for the first time in Europe, began to retreat. Chroniclers would later call it the second Mongol invasion of Hungary, and the first true failure of the Mongol war machine in the West. They lost not because they were weaker, but because their greatest strength, speed, had been turned into their enemy. Béla's strategy had outlived him, but it had worked exactly as designed. Historians today still debate how much of this was planned and how much was instinct. But one thing is certain, Béla IV's transformation of Hungary changed European warfare forever. The same defensive philosophy, fortification, intelligence, and layered resistance would echo centuries later in Poland's border castles, in Austrian passes, even in the star forts of Renaissance Europe. Hungary became the first realm to survive the Mongols through adaptation, not annihilation. 40 years had passed since the nightmare of Mohi. A new generation tilled the same soil that had once run red with their fathers' blood. The world had changed, yet the memory of the Mongols still haunted Europe like a ghost half remembered. In the east, the empire of the steppe had fractured. After Kublai Khan took the throne, the unity forged by Genghis and Subutai splintered into rival Khanates. The Golden Horde in the west, the Yuan in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia. But the hunger for expansion remained, and in 1285 that hunger turned west again toward the plains of Hungary. The commander this time was Nogai Khan, a ruthless prince of the Golden Horde, famed for his cunning and cruelty. He had crushed Bulgaria and raided Poland. Now he sought to remind the West that the sons of Genghis still ruled the wind. But what awaited him in Hungary was no longer the naive kingdom of 1241. Nogai's host crossed the Carpathian Mountains in the dead of winter, a calculated move. The Mongols thrived on cold campaigns. Their horses grazed through snow. Their riders endured what others could not. They expected to strike a paralyzed enemy. But as they entered Transylvania, the first cracks appeared. The mountain passes, once open arteries, had become fortresses in themselves. Béla's descendants had fortified every valley mouth with stone keeps, every bridge with towers. Scouts from the Royal Frontier Guard shadowed the invaders day and night, cutting off foragers and burning fodder behind them. Nogai pressed forward, but what he found was emptiness. Villages had been evacuated in advance, livestock driven away. The roads that once carried merchants now led nowhere. A maze of false routes mapped to confuse his scouts. When Nogai reached the Hungarian plains, he expected the usual bounty: food, shelter, tribute. Instead, the land itself resisted him. The Danube floodgates had been opened days before his arrival, turning wide stretches of farmland into shallow marsh. Supply carts sank. Horses slowed, and the famed Mongol maneuverability began to die in the mud. The weather turned against them. A bitter February storm swept through the plains, freezing armor and horses alike. The nomads who had once moved like shadows were now trapped in a frozen labyrinth. And then the Hungarians struck. Instead, they emerged from forests and castle towns, harassing supply lines, attacking at night, vanishing by dawn. Small detachments of Cuman and Sekeli riders swarmed the flanks, burning camps, capturing stragglers. Nogai's men called it the Silent War. Every road was watched, every rest was a trap, every mile cost blood. Nogai tried to regroup near the Tisza River, hoping to break the Hungarians through one decisive strike, but the defenders never gathered. Instead, the rivers flooded again, isolating his columns. Scouts returned with conflicting maps. Hungarian deception at work. The enemy seemed everywhere and nowhere. Disease crept through the camp. Horses died by the thousands. Food ran out. The cold turned men into statues. The Mongols' greatest weapon, speed, became their curse. They could not advance, could not forage, could not retreat without bleeding men into the winter. Hungarian chroniclers later wrote that the land itself became our soldier. In late February, Nogai ordered a retreat, a word that no Mongol commander had spoken in Europe before. The withdrawal became a rout. As they tried to cross back through the Carpathians, the royal army struck from behind. Not a grand charge, but 1,000 cuts. Cavalry ambushed the rear guard in narrow passes. Avalanches and ambushes finished what hunger had begun. By spring, half of Nogai's force was gone. The invincible riders of the east had been consumed. Europe barely understood what had happened. To the west, chroniclers called it a miracle of the Virgin. But to those who knew Béla's design, it was not a miracle. It was memory, weaponized. Each generation since 1241 had been trained not to fight, but to prepare. Farmers knew which roads to block, which bridges to burn. Monks kept coded maps of refuge paths. Even church bells had different tones, one for worship, another for warning. And when the storm of 1285 passed, it left behind not a broken Hungary, but an undefeated one. The Mongols never returned to Hungary again. Nogai turned his attention southward, his prestige scarred, his myth diminished. The Golden Horde continued to raid Poland and Lithuania, but the image of Mongol invincibility in Europe was gone. To the west, kings took notice. The Austrians, the Bohemians, the Poles began fortifying their frontiers, copying Béla's design, transforming castles from symbols of feudal pride into components of national defense. In that sense, the Hungarian secret strategy did more than destroy a Mongol army. It changed the psychology of European war. For centuries, Europeans had believed that victory lay in courage, in knights and banners, and valor sung by poets. Hungary taught them otherwise, that victory lay in patience, in maps, in systems, in the unity of silence. Decades before their final retreat in 1285, the Mongols had already left a deeper mark on Hungary, one that would reshape Europe itself. The Hungarians had survived the storm that had devoured half of Eurasia, not through divine miracle, nor sheer force of arms, but through intellect, endurance, and adaptation. King Béla IV emerged from the ashes not as a defeated monarch, but as the architect of a new kind of defense across Hungary. He ordered the construction of hundreds of castles, towers, and fortified towns, each designed to resist the mobility of the steppe. In less than a generation, Hungary transformed from a pastoral frontier into one of the most fortified realms in medieval Europe. These fortresses were more than walls of stone. They were the embodiment of a new philosophy. The nomads of the East had thrived on open terrain. The Hungarians mastered the art of denying it. They built networks of defense that turned movement into a burden, numbers into hunger. The same system that broke the Mongols would echo across Europe, influencing Bohemia, Poland, and the German principalities, who soon fortified their own borders against the eastern wind. But Béla's vision reached beyond fortifications. He rebuilt society itself, granting lands to loyal knights, encouraging trade and urban life, and inviting foreign craftsmen to renew what had been lost. From ruin rose reform. Hungary's rebirth became Europe's frontier shield, and Europe learned. The myth of Mongol invincibility shattered in Hungary, reshaped military thinking from Paris to Rome. War was no longer the theater of honor and banners. It was the science of endurance. Empires could fall, but strategy could make survival an art. You've been watching Heroic History English, where the past doesn't fade, it fights back. If you believe history still has battles left to tell, join us. Like, subscribe, and march with us into the next heroic story. Because every empire falls, but the echoes endure.